Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about 1960s The Alamo. And Rena, can you give us a trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of violence, death, dirty face makeup, the heroic Anglo-narrative version of Texas history, notorious chicken hawk and all-around bad dude John Wayne, racism, lost cause apologism, states' rights talking points used to mislead when the goal is to keep slavery, ugly fur hats, age-inappropriate romantic pairings, child labor, hokey dialogue. I think Tejano erasure is an issue here. Yes, but I'm sure, and I apologize in advance, I think I skipped at least 20 other things.
This movie is profoundly offensive. Rena, can you give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources used in this episode include Forget the Alamo, The Rise and Fall of an American Myth by Brian Burrow, Chris Tomlinson, and Jason Stanford, Seeds of Empire, Cotton, Slavery, and the Transformation of the Texas Borderlands, 1800 to 1850, by Andrew J. Torgett. The Behind the Bastards episodes on Jim Bowie and John Wayne. Behind the Oscar, The Secret History of the Academy Awards by Anthony Holden, which is an older book, goes only up until 1990, but it is filled with amazing stories on the first 60 plus years of the Academy Awards. The wonderful website Pajiba did a really good write-up on an Oscar campaign that I will be discussing later, that we will also link to in our show notes. It's called Let's Talk About the Tackiest Oscar Campaign of All Time. So buckle up. Tina, can you tell us a little bit about the Alamo?
Well, the Alamo was an 18th century Spanish missionary complex and is located in San Antonio, Texas. But when we talk about the Alamo, we are usually talking about the siege that occurred there over a 13-day period in 1836, when Texas was part of Mexico, at which roughly 200 people who were holding out against the armies of President General Santa Antonio Lopez de Anna were killed. It is a central piece in the story of how Texas broke away from Mexico and became an independent nation for about a decade before joining the United States, breaking away to join the Confederacy and rejoining the United States. So I guess it couldn't make up its mind. The most famous men to die at the Alamo were former Congressman Davy Crockett, knife lover Jim Bowie, and William Travis. But what were the men at the Alamo fighting for? Why did they not want to be Mexican? I learned in high school in New Jersey that the purpose of the Alamo was to buy time for Sam Houston, but I didn't really think at the time about why exactly they needed to buy time for Sam Houston, or why buying this time was so important that they were willing to die for it. Why did Texas want out from under the command of the central government in Mexico City? In this movie, there are many vague tosses of the word freedom, but the precise freedom that the defenders of the Alamo wanted was the freedom to own slaves. Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about the making of the Alamo and that perennially contemptible chicken hawk, John Wayne, who is one of our least favorite people?
It is always a good day to remind everyone that John Wayne is garbage. Alamo is a 1960 film produced, directed, and starring John Wayne. Its budget was $12 million. Some of it was John Some of it was John Wayne's money, and it made about 20 million. So it didn't fail, but it wasn't as big as he wanted it to be. This was also shot in 70 millimeter Todd AO by William Clothier, and it was released by United Artists, a studio that would gamble again and again on Westerns. This is a John Wayne passion project. He actually started working on this in 1945, shortly after he deferred joining the Army during World War II. Through a series of events, he wasn't able to get this off the ground until 1956, when he signed a deal with United Artists, which gave him $2.5 million to make the movie, and they would later distribute the film. I'm going to just share some fun facts, because documenting the whole making of this movie is boring and I won't do it to you. So the rest of the funding for the film was secured by, quote, wealthy Texans. He put everything on the line to make this movie, and I don't care. Frankie Avalon is in this movie, and he was cast because he could get teenagers in. Richard Widmark, welcome back to the show, Richard Widmark, who plays Jim Bowie, tried to quit about a week into filming, but he was told he had to stay. Contractually couldn't get out of it. And he also just went ahead and rewrote a bunch of his dialogue. Famous auteur John Ford showed up on the set uninvited and tried to take over direction. Wayne mollified him by shunting him off to shoot second unit footage, none of which would be used. John Wayne's daughter, who appears in this film, described this as an intensely personal project for him, and John Wayne felt like it was an opportunity to share his politics, and apparently a lot of the dialogue is John Wayne's own views, which is why this film often features characters sort of talking at each other, but not actually having any conversations. John Wayne intended this film to be an allegory for the Cold War against the Soviet Union and China, though historian Timothy Todish claims, quote, there is not a single scene in the Alamo which corresponds to a historically verifiable incident. When this movie came out, it was banned in Mexico. I could not find any information about whether that ban has been lifted. Charlton Heston was among the actors who were sent the script, and John Wayne really wanted him to play Jim Bowie. Heston later said there seemed good reasons for him not to do the film, and when pressed, stated having John Wayne as director would be one of those reasons.
That is incredible, Sarah. And Charlton Heston at the time still had decent taste. It was before he saw that Goldwater billboard that allegedly changed him forever.
Rena, just to kick this off, I just want to be clear. I am furious. When we embarked upon this project, I did not know that within a calendar year, I would be watching 2 John Wayne movies of my own volition without the phrase required coursework in front of them.
I'm sorry for doing that to you, Sarah. The good news is that I don't think John Wayne made any more biopics after this.
Thank God. Rena, what about you? What are your feelings here?
In terms of the Alamo, I have no emotional or ancestral investment in the heroic Anglo narrative, which is what Texas schoolchildren learn in 7th grade. At the time that all of this went down, my ancestors were dealing with pogroms on the other side of the Atlantic. But I can say that I am for whatever alternate history, minus any be careful what you wish for because it may come true scenarios that I'm not going to bother detailing here. I am for whatever alternate history would have resulted in the Texians losing, because I like the idea of an America where there is less slavery faster, or better yet, no slavery sooner, and a world where you and I get to grow up in a more cosmopolitan America. An America where, instead of idiotically priding ourselves on our monolingualism, we take pride in being as multilingual as our European friends, but take speaking multiple languages for granted as a thing that most people simply do. The too long didn't read of it all is that I was rooting for Santa Anna to just blast John Wayne and cohort to Kingdom Come the whole way through the movie, but I'm aware that Santa Anna wasn't that great himself and was politically corrupt. This is a shame because I wanted to pure-heartedly root for a disabled anti-slavery Latino to kill John Wayne, although Santa Anna had not yet lost a leg at that time. But Santa Anna also sucks. He was a dictator who was president of Mexico 11 times in 20 years. Later in life, he is credited with being one of the people to create chewing gum as a mass market product. So he also caused cavities. Furthermore, why did Mexico want the American settlers to move to Texas in the first place, when it would later cause them so many problems? And the answer is so that they could defend the land from Native American tribes who'd been there before the conquistadores and the pilgrims. I also love to pretend that in that imaginary world where Mexico wins, that Mexico can't keep control, and maybe, just maybe, we wind up with a vast swath of territory where Native Americans have power and refuge instead of what happened where we shuttled them onto reservations and murdered a lot of them. And this was probably not how it would have gone down, because manifest destiny conquers all, and tribes often fought amongst themselves, but I can dream, can't I? So in my head, we lost at the Alamo, Santa Anna killed John Wayne, and there's a broad, collective Native American nation, running through Texas and up the middle of the country.
Question. You know that I am not good at history. Correct me if I'm wrong. So 1836 is, while we're doing all this mishigas at the Alamo, this is also when Andrew Jackson is really doubling down on the Trail of Tears, right? This is potentially a very special time to be a white scumbag.
This is the final year of Andrew Jackson's second term, so Martin Van Buren is elected, and Jackson is in his lame duck period. Something I wanted to highlight also, the 1830s are one of my favorite decades in fashion ever, and we don't really see any of that. I love a poofy skirt and a dramatic sleeve, and the 1830s were all about enormous poofy sleeves and nipped-in waists and great big skirts and all the things I love. A lot of the wardrobe that we see here is just in a style we'll call Western, that in the American mind covers about a 50-year period and doesn't change very much.
There's a real laziness to a lot of the kind of details that make a period piece good throughout this movie that is enormously frustrating.
I want to say this. There were no heroes at the Alamo. The only person involved in the Alamo who I have any admiration for, or whose story I'm interested in, is Joe, a slave belonging to William Travis, who was one of very few survivors inside the Alamo.
Is Joe in this movie?
Joe is not in this movie. I guess Santa Anna said, any black people he found inside the Alamo were free. But Joe went to tell the Travis family what had happened to William Travis and went back to being a slave. At one point, Sammy Davis Jr. wanted to be in this movie as one of the enslaved people, but John Wayne said no. And what we get is this, I am not going to blame the actor playing Jethro, because he's sitting on the same bench as Hattie McDaniel, who said she'd rather play the maid than be one. So I'm not going to blame this actor, but the character is every Song of the South cliche, and it's quite shameful.
So it's 1960, and we're going to talk a lot about where this film sits at the intersection of things as we get into awards talk and everything. But in 4 years, Sidney Poitier is going to win Best Actor. I want to put that out there in the same way as I mentioned how in The Agony and the Ecstasy, we're 4 years away from Midnight Cowboy. And this is the garbage that John Wayne is giving us.
Sidney Poitier had already been nominated for an Academy Award 2 years earlier for The Defiant Ones, and that was also a film where it had the same situation that we had with Dalton Trumbo and The Brave One, where the script was written by blacklisted writers and the award couldn't be accepted. And 1960 is such a great year in filmmaking. This movie did not deserve a nomination because two other films that came out that year that deserved that slot that usually goes to an epic much more are Exodus and Spartacus, both of which are written by Dalton Trumbo.
Would be happy to live in a world where Exodus or Spartacus won Best Picture that year too. I'm just glad the Alamo didn't win. John Wayne is like, I'm going to compare him right now to the proverbial guy who peaks in high school, except he is the guy who peaked during the blacklist. And like, he just wanted to stay in the blacklist era for the rest of his career. That was where he wanted to live. That was his glory.
I feel like if John Wayne were alive today, he'd be a cop.
He would be a cop, or he would be one of the people that Trump put on his weird, like, reviving Hollywood's golden age committee. He would be amongst these men who have absolutely no qualification for like being in a place where they are talking about what art matters and what art doesn't matter. And John Wayne is someone who art never mattered to, but being right did. All I know is this year I have spent way more time thinking about John Wayne than I have ever spent any other year, perhaps collectively my entire life.
Be very glad that How the West Was Won does not count as a biopic, because do you know who plays your beloved General Sherman in that movie?
No, I'm not happy about it at all.
There will be no choice dialogue segment this week. This movie has no quotable choice dialogue. The Alamo, in terms of its dialogue, there is only a race to the bottom for most excruciating dialogue. And as an example, I didn't have to like transcribe it because the cringiest John Wayne speech was right there on IMDb. So I will try to read this to you now, but Sarah, you might need to take over for me. So this is something that John Wayne says. Republic. I like the sound of... I'll try again. Republic. Republic. I like the sound of the word. It means people can live free, talk free, go or come, buy or sell, be drunk or sober, however they choose. Some words give you a feeling. Republic is one of those words. Sarah, can you read this speech?
Yes.
I can't.
Yes.
All right, start from the top because
okay. I also want to make an important call out here. This is not what the word republic means. But I'm going to, okay. Republic. I like the sound of that word. It means people can live free, talk free, go or come, buy or sell, be drunk or sober, however they choose. Some words give you a feeling. Republic is one of those words that makes me tight in the throat. The same tightness a man gets when his baby takes his first step, or his first baby shaves and makes his first sound as a man. Some words can give you a feeling that makes your heart warm. Republic is one of those words.
Thank you, Sarah. You are a better actor than me. I couldn't do it.
It's pretty bad.
This is a quintessential example of the dialogue in The Alamo. And not only is the dialogue excruciating, the music is overbearing. And I don't think we've touched enough in this podcast on soundtracks or the role of music. The music in The Alamo is by Dmitri Tiomkin, who wrote some of the stickiest earworms in old Hollywood. I still have music that he wrote for Gunfight at the OK Corral stuck in my head, and I haven't seen that movie in 20 years.
The music, like this movie, I can't, it's so strange. The score is very jaunty for what we're dealing with here. Like we open on this music and also the kind of credit that you don't really see much of anymore, but like Richard Boone must have an amazing agent because he plays Sam Houston. He's in 2 scenes and he has a credit that is guest star Richard Boone.
He thinks he's Judi Dench in Shakespeare in Love or something.
I mean, I'm sure he thought, like everyone in this film seems to have thought, that he was going to get an Academy Award. All of the credits are over like paintings of the Alamo. We're setting up this nonsense legend really well. The artlessness with which this film was shot too, like there is absolutely, not unlike Agony and the Ecstasy, like there is absolutely no sort of structure to understanding who people are and why they're going where they're going. There's failure to set up so many different things because all this movie is like John Wayne jerking himself off over like his ideas of what patriotism is. And I was reminded of a quote I use all the time at work, from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, which is, I hope you could see what a silly waste of resources this was. It's ultimately like a very shallow film in which characters are poorly constructed. They speechify rather than develop. The score is too loud. The costumes are trash. And I don't care about anyone in this.
It's a very long film. I was thinking, who is the audience for this? The ideal audience?
This is a movie for like red-pilled dudes who think like the most masculine thing you could do is die for slavery. It's for men's rights activists who have a death wish.
So we see people in ponchos riding in on horses. And I was just thinking, it should bother the Mexicans that these Anglos are not assimilating. They aren't learning Spanish. They're only pretending to be Catholic. I bet if you throw any spice in their food, they'll sneeze.
I mean, who isn't pretending to be Catholic, though, right? I think that it's important for me to make an observation here because the movie at no point addresses the role that slavery has in this. It is a very sort of like vague, like all of that Republic speech. It's kind of like that over and over. We did discuss on Gandhi what I did during history class, which was pass notes about boys that I liked. And because of that, I watched this as film and waited for it to educate me, and it did not. And by the time I finished, I was so confused. And through another series of events, I found out that it was essentially the proto-Civil War, which is, I guess, why they don't mention the whole I need my right to have slaves business in this. But I found it fascinating because I was watching it and I'm like, I have no idea why any of this is happening.
Mexico invited Americans in to keep the Comanche and other Native American tribes from taking over land that had belonged to them before the Spanish show up and say it's ours. Thanks to the cotton gin, which we would have learned about, cotton became vastly more profitable. So the Anglo settlers being invited in to keep the Native Americans from taking power over their land wanted to put together cotton plantations for which they thought they needed slaves. The only reason they wanted to move there was so that they could start cotton plantations, not because they had any desire to broaden their cultural horizons and learn about how to be Mexican. Then Mexico declares independence from Spain. Over half the population of Mexico is mixed race. In Mexico, there's not a ton of slavery. They abolished slavery as a symbol of throwing off the oppressor. So there's a situation where if the settlers leave, they have nobody to try to control the Native Americans. But if they stay, they want to have slaves. And this goes back and forth and back and forth. Yeah. A really great book that I read for this was the book Forget the Alamo. So Forget the Alamo clarifies, as hard as it may be to accept, Texas as we know it exists only because of slave labor. Southerners, Southerners, and most Texians came from the South, wouldn't immigrate to Texas without it. Thousands didn't, in fact, worried that the Mexican government's ingrained opposition to slavery put their property at risk. For Mexicans, newly freed from Spanish oppression, abolishing slavery was a moral issue. For the American colonists, it was an issue of wealth creation. In the early years, as we'll see, each new Mexican effort to ban slaves got Texians packing to head back to America. In later years, many put away their suitcases and took out their guns. Back to the Alamo, there's a vague notion of freedom, but it's the kind of freedom spelled capital F-R-E-E, capital D-U-M-B, as in, but my freedom.
And it's freedom for white men to
Yes.
own people.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I can see why we didn't lead with that in this movie, because it's pretty outdated and not really the honorable thing that they make it seem like. The fact that we have mythologized this profoundly stupid fight over being able to own people, yet again, we are doing that. First of all, this is barely a movie. Second of all, this whole situation is stupid.
So it may shock you to hear this, but it has only been in the past 20 or 30 years that historians have started to touch on that the Alamo was about slavery. Back to this god-awful movie. A bunch of men on horses have arrived in San Antonio, and we see some men in uniform complaining. Sam Houston has arrived at the Alamo, where Jim Bowie is too drunk or too hungover to meet him.
Lawrence Harvey is here, star of Manchurian Candidate and other things. He's wearing white pants, which I found incredibly impractical.
So, to my best knowledge, World War I is the first time I can think of where it occurred to anyone that dressing soldiers to blend in with their surroundings might make it harder to kill them. So Lawrence Harvey is playing William B. Travis, who will write a series of desperate letters asking for aid. He comes across as stuck up here, which led me to wonder, is he a West Point man? And the movie is making some insufferable point about good old American homespun wisdom being superior to highfalutin expertise. But when I read up on Travis, I discovered that he'd been a school teacher, a farmer, and a lawyer, but what he hadn't done, served in the army. His first experience is in local militias in the early 1830s, and my best guess as to how he winds up being commissioned as a lieutenant colonel is that we are in the Wild West.
There we go.
Also, Jim Bowie, and yes, welcome back to the show, Richard Widmark. We last saw you in a much better performance as Charles VII in St. Joan. Jim Bowie. So, yeah, slave owner involved in land swindles, con man, known for supposedly inventing a certain type of knife, and a fight he got into on some sandbar where it was some kind of duel, but he and his opponent both missed each other, and he winds up using this big knife. Not a terrific person.
What's nice, though, too, is that they keep saying everyone's full names every time a character enters a scene. They do that several times. It's very helpful.
This goes back to the point that Dewey Cox made, where all of the Beatles and any other major star are constantly saying their own full name in a sentence and also addressing each other that way, just to like remind everyone of who they are.
So Sam Houston is basically there saying, like, you got to hold this fort for freedom. He has an aide de camp who is played by Patrick Wayne. Patrick Wayne, I will say, comes by his acting chops, honestly. That's my nice way of saying what I need to say about Patrick Wayne's performance in this film. Lawrence Harvey's hair is very confusing in this movie, too. It's like part boot brush. It looks like someone was cutting his hair, and in the middle of his haircut, the haircutters union went on strike. And this guy just
looked a little bit like
dropped the scissors and walked away.
Looked a bit like AstroTurf.
This whole movie's a mess, like right down to people's hair. And I just ragged on Patrick Wayne's acting, but like everyone's performance in this movie, even the good actors, like the Richard Widmarks and the Lawrence Harveys are pretty much giving the yelling and I don't know what to do with my hand school of acting happening on screen across the board. We talked about how Bob Fosse as a director elevates everyone's performances and brings out really the best in actors. Like everyone is being dragged down by the artless direction of John Wayne.
John Wayne makes everyone worse, and he should be replaced in this movie by Margot Martindale, who makes everything better.
I would watch that movie. Lawrence Harvey's like, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to defend it for freedom. And we meet up with Jim Bowie. He's in a hole in the ground, sleeping one off.
And we see the Mexican flag being taken up or down on a flagpole. I'm waiting for someone to mention that the reason they don't want to be Mexican is so that they will have the freedom to deny freedom to the people they want to continue owning.
Nope. No one ever says that. It's all about the word republic sticking in your throat and making you rock hard. There's a lot of maneuvering of troops and people and things happening. Everyone's converging on the Alamo right now. We've got Jim Bowie and his men converging on the Alamo. We've got Lawrence Harvey's existing army that is there. And then we've got John Wayne's crew, who I will talk about, coming in. And the stakes are being set up that there are 7,000 men coming from Santa Anna's army, and they need to protect this broken down fort. And we basically like have this fight over and over about whether or not they should do it. I'm going to do it. No, I'm not. I'm going to leave. Yes, I am. Now I'm going to go. Now I'm going to stay. Pieces just moving around the chessboard in a circular motion.
Yeah. So this is a dumb place to put yourself for a siege. There are reasons you can see why the Alamo makes no sense as a place to have a siege or to defend. And it's to Bowie's credit that he points out how stupid this is. And so John Wayne shows up. He is playing Davy Crockett. He shows up with a bunch of his Tennesseans, and they're all wearing fur hats, and this makes so much sense in like the Texas heat, wearing a fur hat. And he also wore a fur hat in The Conqueror.
Yeah, like they're all wearing raccoon caps like we see on Davy Crockett. As I mentioned, there's these three disparate groups, and they're all like exceptionally well identified in this film because we've got Davy Crockett's men who are kind of like feral lost boys wearing scavenger fur. They carouse a lot, like they're lively. And then we've got Lawrence Harvey's guys who are all polished and like real soldiers, and Bowie's are all kind of cowboys. And that's really the whole movie.
And Crockett is, everyone's like, ooh, you're Davy Crockett. So Davy Crockett shows up at the Alamo because he's not in Congress anymore, and he'd kind of washed up in American politics. So he might have been thinking, oh, Texas will need a president. And he's projecting like homespun, folksy chatter all over the place. It's super boring. And welcome to the movie. Best Supporting Actor nominee, Chill Wills.
I'm going to try and restrain the full thrust of my feelings around Chill Wills till the end of this. But he's like in John Wayne's crew. His name is Beekeeper. He's a very old looking, like very broad actor who gives what I would say fairly is a terrible performance. He's lip syncing and playing the guitar. He couldn't be worse at fake playing the guitar if the guitar was not even in the room with him. He gives this, I guess it would be like a Randy Quaid kind of comic relief, but he seems so unacquainted with like the notion of acting in front of a camera. Like there's so many shots where he is just like looking right into the camera, almost like, oh, hey, the camera's there. Like he's so hammy. Like many of the people in this film, seems like he is actually drunk throughout the filming. And the movie grinds to a halt every time he comes on screen for like a moment. The flow of this film, such as it is, stops to make room for his comedy. It's an atrocious performance in an atrocious movie.
I honestly didn't remember this very hammy performance following my first watch. I was like, where's the guy who got an undeserved Best Supporting Actor nomination?
So basically, Lawrence Harvey, Davy Crockett shows up, and Lawrence Harvey is like, I need to talk to him. And that's when we have this whole speech about Republic. And Davy Crockett's all, yeah, I'll keep my men here to help you guard the Alamo. You just sort of like start to see that like Davy Crockett is actually perfect. He's such a great, amazing dude. And he gets along with his men and he squares everything off when Bowie and Lawrence Harvey do not play well with each other in the sandbox because they have very different philosophies about fighting. But Davy Crockett's there to make everything okay and like constantly unite them. This movie is just like sucking off John Wayne the whole time and making him look perfect. And Davy Crockett is perfect. He's the best guy. And there's just like stuff in this movie. Like it's somehow like the parts are also meaningless. And you can't get invested in it, that none of it matters. And it feels like there's actually like maybe 5 minutes of movie in all of this.
So we meet the tacked on female love interest of the film, a young Mexican woman who has been widowed and she's being pushed around by this bad white guy who doesn't want to tip the little boy who's been carrying their luggage. And another way of demonstrating that Davy Crockett is a good guy is he winks at the kid and knocks on the door and tries to get this guy who is pushing this young woman around to tip. He looks like he could be her grandfather. This is gross. And I will say this, I would rather watch a movie that didn't even bother casting any women than watch a tacked on female love interest.
It's just like, let's pad out the runtime of this movie for reasons. Let's talk about her for a sec. Her name is Linda Crystal. She is described in her bio as an Argentine American actress, but her dad is French and her mother is Italian. So they went like some of the distance in casting a woman who was familiar with life outside of America. There's a lot of things happening to make her look convincingly Mexican. Again, it's 1960.
And she's wearing what looks like a see-through lace blouse at one point with what looks like a bullet bra under it. And at one point they go for a walk and he makes a speech about trees similar to the one that he made about the word republic, where he says something about Adam and Eve probably stood under a tree like this, or I didn't much notice trees for a long time, and just gag.
Like none of this matters. What is even happening? Why are we doing this? Let's stuff this in the giant crap sausage that is this movie. Like she's dressed like did you have Chi-Chi's growing up?
I don't know what you're talking about.
There is a restaurant chain called Chi-Chi's. I don't know if it is still around. It is a Mexican cantina. She's basically wearing a costume of a waitress at a Mexican cantina in the 90s.
That sounds about right. And I guess she's getting forced into marriage with this clown who wouldn't tip the child servant for some reason having to do with her family property. And then Davy Crockett says, it's not safe here, you have to go. So big waste of time.
Frankie Avalon shows up at this point. When I was watching this, I actually thought to myself, I was like, I'm really surprised they didn't squeeze in like a surfing song in here, because that's about the quality of film we're working with here. Like where they're like, let's just get a song in where he's singing about surfing for the kids.
Great. So tacked on female love interest mentions that all the weaponry is in the basement of a church.
Which means there's a basement in the Alamo. I just want to put that pin in there. Rena, you've seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure, right?
I think I watched it at a sleepover in like 4th grade. I don't really remember much about it.
In that movie, he is told that his bike gets stolen and that it has been brought to the basement of the Alamo.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets the Alamo, he goes on a tour, and he raises his hand at the end of the tour when she's like, are there any questions? And he's like, where's the basement? And she's like, there's no basement at the Alamo. And everyone laughs at him. And finds out that it's all a lie, that his bike is in the basement of the Alamo. So I am just saying, for the record here, there's a basement at the Alamo. So there's more like mischievous of like people meeting, people deciding whether or not to stay. Like every woman is throwing themselves at John Wayne. Like Lawrence Harvey's wife is throwing herself at him. Like every woman is just like, oh, hey, it's John Wayne. It's a 60-year-old man. Hot.
God, he's so old.
Like everyone in this movie was directed to be like, you want to get with him. So he tricks his men into staying like they are children. Like he writes a fake letter from General Santa Anna telling them that they need to leave because they'll never win, and they all get tricked into sticking around to fight him for the Republic.
They should leave. They won't win.
It's just shenanigans. Like, it's so jolly and weird that they're all like, we are having the best time while we get ready to die for our cause.
Somewhere in here, Jim Bowie's men, some of them sold their guns so that they could get money for alcohol.
Can't blame them.
Yeah, and they do show some copious drinking in here, but also the movie pretends that Crockett is a widower, presumably so they can tack on his romance with Flocka, which is the name of the woman in the waitress outfit. But the thing is that Davy Crockett's wife was still alive back east, and she lived until 1860. Everyone gets drunk. Jim Bowie is mad over something, and then Jim Bowie finds out that his wife died.
Yep. And because Davy Crockett is perfect, he is able to comfort him.
Thing is, Davy Crockett says, I lived through it, Jim. No, he didn't, because we know his wife is still alive, and she will live until 1860. Mrs. Bowie and their children had died of cholera in 1833, 3 years earlier. But when Richard Widmark is talking about his wife having died, Richard Widmark is so unconvincing that I started laughing when he said that his wife died. His performance here reminds me of that Dawson's Creek meme of James Vanderbeek crying on the dock. But Richard Widmark was good in St. Joan, which came out 3 years before the Alamo. I was perplexed, and then it occurred to me the answer to the difference in his acting between the two films could be that Otto Preminger was a better director than John Wayne. When you're directed by a wooden ham, you turn into a wooden ham. It made me appreciate what a director beyond overall creative vision does in terms of pulling a performance out of an actor.
True.
This is a desperate performance. Like, he does not want to be here, and I don't blame him one little bit. Also, he looks way older here, and it's only like 3 years in between.
John Wayne convinces him to stay. They send Frankie Avalon out to alert Sam Houston that they need more help, which will also in turn save his life because he's young, because he won't be there when the siege happens. And then Santa Anna gives them the space to, once they've surrounded the Alamo, he says, we'll give you an hour to make sure that the women and children leave, which I was like, that was very gracious of you to do before you kill everyone. And there's a blind woman who was maybe also from Tennessee. Her husband is like, I don't know that I can leave you. And John Wayne's like, you should go with her. And then his wife makes a speech, which is basically like, you should stay here and die because that's the right thing to do. So patriotism is you should stay and die.
This is a death cult.
And also, this speech would ring truer to me were it not written by a man who refused to serve in war. Is real fucking rich coming from him. And here's the thing. I am not going to say that I can fight in a war. I cannot. But I also don't make art about how everyone should be doing it and should be shamed if they don't.
Yeah.
So they're surrounding them and the battle's going to start, and maybe it does start. And Frankie Avalon, we cut to him where he's at Sam Houston's tent where he's training people, and he's like, we need help. And Richard Boone makes a speech here that is, again, like the all hands and yelling school of acting, where he's yelling at his men by saying, like, if you complain, I want you to remember that these men are buying time so you can just get like one more day of training in. And those are real heroes, and you're all garbage. And it's all stupid. It's just so stupid. Like, so much of American history is predicated on stupidity. So much of American present is as well. And I'm mad at it. I am so mad at it. Okay, sorry.
So, on a note about buying time, there's the idea that the Alamo brought Sam Houston 10 precious days so that he could help preserve slavery in Texas. And again, from Forget the Alamo. This myth persists to this day. In fact, Santa Anna had told Mexico City that he planned to secure San Antonio by March 2nd. In the end, the siege ended up delaying him all of 4 days. The fact is, as painful as it may be to hear, the Alamo's trapped defenders died for pretty much nothing.
That's not what this movie says.
That is my own gleeful emphasis thrown on. No, they didn't die for nothing. They died to preserve slavery. So it's coming up to the big battle where all of these stupid men have decided to stay and die so that they can assert the right of white men to own other people. And when Jim Bowie knows that he's about to die, he frees his slave, Jethro. And Jethro chooses to stay and die at the Alamo because, quote, it seems like that's what we're fighting for here, freedom.
I can't. I don't want to belabor the end of this movie, but everybody dies. And
everybody dies, and the battle is shown happening in broad daylight, but in fact, it started at night, like before dawn.
Oh, they couldn't have done that. They couldn't have pulled this off in darkness.
Do you think they couldn't have shot a night fight scene in 1960?
I don't think John Wayne could shoot a night fight scene in 1960. Let me put it that way.
This doesn't look any different or any better than any other Western. And I guess you can go online and Google all of the goofs and inaccuracies in all of this. And also the debate over who died how, because Crockett did not die blowing up that magazine. It was assigned to someone else. Jim Bowie was indisposed. He had caught something, so he was in bed most of the time.
Everything about this final battle sequence is so poorly executed. It is so poorly shot that you have no real sense of anything that's happening except like people are just dying. I would describe it as the photo negative of the opening of Saving Private Ryan, essentially, like where you have no sense of the stakes. It's just like constant like wide angle shots. There were a couple of points where I interested in rewinding and watching it again. Like I'm pretty sure like there were some reused shots in this, like they just recycled some of the shots that already happened. There's a scene where someone falls off a roof and no one notices. Life is meaningless in this movie, but also death is like something they are all so psyched about. The soundtrack is like, yeah, we're dying. No one's scared to die. They're all super psyched to die.
The blood looks so fake, and there's this one part where you see these two yokels in fur. I don't know if in this part of Texas, it's too warm to wear fur by early March. But you see a couple of them saying, yeah, I guess we're about to die. And they like die with one of them leaning over the other.
Like the deaths in this film have all the weight of watching Wile E. Coyote die. It's cartoonish and stupid.
Lost track of who was dying when because I cared so little. Like I had to go back and I was like, where did Travis die? Where did Davy Crockett die? Widmark does have a nice death scene where they're like closing in on him and he shoots from his bed. But again, I had to like go back and like try just to like remind myself of who dies where. Sarah, who would you rather watch? John Wayne or Robert Wuhl? Robert Wuhl is Sarah's least favorite actor, for those of you who have not listened to our Cobb episode or our Bohemian Rhapsody episode.
Hate that guy. They both possess what I would describe as a unique ability to make everyone around them worse at acting, which is a gift. But I am going to say Robert Wuhl. Here's why. First, Robert Wuhl is in exactly one more movie with Michael Stuhlbarg than John Wayne. So the odds of running into him are higher. Second, Robert Wuhl ruined scenes in several good movies, like Tim Burton's Batman, Good Morning Vietnam, Bull Durham, even Cobb. And John Wayne is in a bunch of movies that I never want to watch. I don't want to interact with him. He's terrible. Robert Wuhl is also terrible, but he's not the star of most things. Like the entire film isn't set around his very limited skills. Whereas there are countless movies featuring John Wayne where he's in like 90% of the shots.
Well, thankfully, he's dead. We're at the end of the movie. This was quite disjointed, I guess.
Like, it's such a nothing of a movie.
Some people get drunk and then everyone dies in a battle sequence that looks like any Western you've ever seen, but less worthy. So we do have corpse capers this week, which makes it slightly better. Yes. So as I mentioned, Santa Anna lost a leg, not in this war, but he lost his leg in an 1838 military venture that he was partaking in, sort of to revive his reputation from losing Texas. So it was an 1838 military venture known as the Pastry War. And he had his leg ceremoniously buried with a funeral that included full military honors. As I was studying this week, I found myself thinking about the unit we sometimes do called Sarah Somehow Managed to Drag Jonestown into It because you are obsessed with Jonestown.
Mm-hmm.
And the thread that I'm finding from Jonestown to the Alamo is they're both death cults. Because I just found myself thinking, this looks a lot like a death cult in looking at the Alamo. I was originally going to outright joyously say that the difference between the Alamo and Jonestown is that the Alamo was a white nationalist death cult. But I would be committing the same dishonor that the generations of liars who propagated the heroic Anglo narrative of the Alamo story committed in whitewashing away the memory of the Tejanos who died at the Alamo. And we hear a vague reference to the Seguin family, but Juan Seguin, who was a major defender, is not in this. You see a lot of white people. You don't see any much representation for the Tejanos who died. As much as I love to sling hyperbole, when the word combinations sound good to me, I have to pull back and qualify if the most striking wording isn't the truth. There's also a massive can of worms around Tejano identity that I am unequipped to answer as a Northeasterner who has never set foot in Texas beyond airport layovers, which means that I have never set foot in Texas because I avoid going anywhere where you need a car to get around.
Fair.
But Sarah, while we're here, can you please tell us who is a better person, John Wayne or Jim Jones?
This is a tough question, but I will give John Wayne the credit that he did not directly murder 900 people. It's a low-ass bar to get over in terms of being the better person versus the man who directly murdered over 900 people. I would also note that the other connection here that I think is worth noting is Jim Jones used Black people, in particular Black women, as a human shield against claims of bad behavior. And he also exploited the era in which he started to grow in popularity, which was the tail end of Jim Crow. The People's Temple had many, many members who would have been part of the Great Migration to California. He positioned himself as a savior of Black people, a white savior, if you will. I would also say, too, like, there's been claims over the years that Jonestown was actually a social experiment run by the CIA, and they specifically targeted Black people to be a part of it, which is, I don't care for the conspiracy theories around this. Also worth noting is there was a final survivor who was a Black woman in Jonestown named Hyacinth Thrash, who had had enough of him the day in which he murdered everyone with the mass suicide drill. And she stayed in her bunk and took a nap and woke up and saw 900 dead people.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Bonkers.
Wow. So this is probably the last time that we'll see John Wayne for a very long time. He made a few other films that are arguably biopics, including the intriguing title, The Barbarian and the Geisha.
Excuse me?
I think it's about the opening up of Japan in the 1850s or something along those lines. But yes, he made a movie called The Barbarian and the Geisha. His character name on the Wikipedia page is linked to a Wikipedia page for an actual person. So I'm assuming that The Barbarian and the Geisha is a biopic, but I will not make you watch it, okay? This is like scraping the barrel because we've run out of biopics in like 2035. There are thousands of films on our list that I would prefer to get to before The Barbarian and the Geisha, and that includes Wired. We have awards talk this week.
We do. Everyone have a seat, get yourself a cup of coffee, because this is going to take a minute.
I've spoken before about how 1960 is such an important year in film, and even when you look at the movies that were not Oscar fodder, there's so much happening that year that's fascinating. Ocean's 11 came out that year. We could do a whole other podcast about 1960 in filmmaking. So, movies released in 1960 include La Dolce Vita, Psycho, The Unforgiven, La Ventura, Breathless, which was not a pick for Best Foreign Film, The Magnificent Seven, The World of Susie Wong, Cimarron, Sunset at Campobello. Elizabeth Taylor won for Butterfield 8 that year. Elmer Gantry was another one of the nominees this year. My favorite horror film, Eyes Without a Face, or Les Yeux Sans Visage. Roger Corman's House of Usher. Inherit the Wind.
This movie is probably most famous for one of the most egregious and offensive Academy Award PR campaigns in the history of ever. A little bit of background on me here. I am what some people would call a communications professional. So this campaign offends my personal sensibilities and hurts my feelings because it besmirches my career choices, a career path that is already frequently besmirched in filmmaking, as well as the many wonderful professionals I have worked alongside who would never do anything like this. As we've discussed, we're all sophisticated enough at this time to recognize that the Academy Awards recognize talented people and great work. They are also highly flawed. Their voters are not above reproach in what causes them to vote or not vote for a film. And often we're rewarding people for things that we didn't reward them for in the first place. I also want to state a very clear ground rule up front because we're going to hear a lot of, well, so-and-so didn't know in this storytelling. They always know. Working in the PR and communications industry, when you have a client, you don't do anything without their sign off. Communications professionals are not paid to go rogue. So anytime you hear that ever in this world, it's almost always bullshit. And you just mentioned a bunch of movies that came out in 1960 And we talked at length about the 1960 Academy Awards in our Spartacus episode. It's a really good year in filmmaking. Interesting, inventive films, and filmmakers are doing some of their best work, setting the stage for a very transformative time period in filmmaking. And laying the track for a really creative period. And then there's John Wayne. He is a bitter pissant who hated art and creativity, but also felt like he was better at it than everyone else. So he's got a chip on his shoulder. He really wanted to get Academy Awards for this movie. So he hired a PR person named Russell Birdwell, who had done the Gone with the Wind Academy Award campaign and launch campaign, which, as a reminder, was 1939. Times have changed, but Russell Birdwell's techniques did not. John Wayne gave him $250,000 to just go nuts and build out a campaign. As we have also discussed, $250,000 in 1960 is about $1 trillion in 2025.
Because I believe in nuance and balance, I interject here to say that I looked it up, and $250,000 in 1960 is equal to roughly $2,695,000 in 2025.
Fair enough. So an ad in Variety in 1960 cost $250 or so, started around there. So what followed this is an awards campaign that harnesses all of the things that the film represents: toxic masculinity, white male privilege, the fact that white men think that they are owed everything all the time, and aggrieved, imperious, and condescending commentary. John Wayne himself early on took out a 200K colorful 3-page fold-out ad in Life magazine in July 1960 that said there were no ghostwriters at the Alamo. People didn't understand it then. I don't understand it now. But the guess was that it was about the collapse of American values during an election year. But no one really understood. Yeah, no one really understood what he was saying there. He was also asked in an interview with Variety about the film's awards potential early on, and he said, "This is not the first time that the Alamo has been the underdog." So Russell Birdwell kicks off this campaign with a 183-page press release that described John Wayne as the George Washington of film, among many, many other things. In order to get a sense of how many words this press release probably had in it, I looked up a couple of different press releases from the era, because the way that they were typeset, the way that they were spaced is very different than the way press releases look today. I did an approximate word count on those per page just to get a sense. And I would guess, based on that, that this press release was probably roughly between 13,000 and 15,000 words long. And just to contextualize here, The Great Gatsby is 47,000 words. I just want you to understand how GD long that press release is. In one incident, Birdwell took out a billboard advertisement in Hollywood that quoted John Ford as saying, "This is the most important motion picture ever made. It is timeless. It will run forever." I don't know if John Ford knew yet that his footage didn't make it into the movie and how that would have changed his attitude. This campaign goes on for 43 days. This is 43 days of this like over-the-top bullshit. This campaign climaxes with an added Variety that depicts a giant tombstone that implies that God himself wants the Alamo to win an Oscar. I will read you the contents of this ad. Hollywood, born 1907 AD, died 3000 AD. When the motion picture industry's epitaph is written, what will it say? Will another civilization coming upon the ruins find something of worth? A spool of film spelling out a great dream? Or a sequence that merely featured a sex measurement or an innuendo that, quote, got by the censors? Will there be left behind for the ages to come an enduring screen literature that played a vital role in the 20th century? Or do you care? The sincere and the dedicated do care. This includes every man and woman who contributed in the making of the Alamo. They believe that the motion picture is the greatest force for good or evil the communication sphere has ever known. The sincere and dedicated throughout this industry have used it for good. They know that inexorable evolution will someday, perhaps by 3000 AD, replace the present-day magic of celluloid in a manner not yet born in the ivory towers of those devoted to the science of obsolescence. But an obituary will come, an epitaph will be written. What will it say? Or do you care?
I feel like that thing about innuendo that got by the censors is him throwing shade at my beloved Billy Wilder. And yeah, I would rather have that bit of innuendo be what's left for aliens to find in 3000.
These ads were described by critics as moral blackmail, constantly asking people, what will Oscar say to the world this year? And saying a vote against the Alamo was a vote against America, against patriotism. Does any of this sound familiar? I'm sure it does.
Uh-huh.
So, people were kind of critical of this ad campaign, and John Wayne was constantly complaining about anyone criticizing his campaign, to the point that Birdwell took out ads attacking individual critics who expressed distaste over it. And nominations are announced, and John Wayne did successfully bully his way into 6 Oscar nominations for the Alamo, but none for Best Director and Actor, none for any performers except sad old man Chill Wills for Best Supporting Actor.
How did Chill Wills get this nomination?
It's the classic, old person who's had a career in the industry award. It's the ornamental nomination. According to a biography by a man named Michael Munn about John Wayne called John Wayne, the Man Behind the Myth, Wayne wanted Lawrence Harvey to receive the Academy Award nomination for supporting actor. Apparently, Michael Munn, like everyone we've talked about tonight, is discredited, so no one knows if that's actually true. There were 2 real contenders for Best Supporting Actor that year. Chill Wills was someone who should have been happy to be nominated. The 2 real contenders were Peter Ustinov, who, as we know, won, and Sal Mineo for Exodus. And taking the nomination as the win was not going to fly for Chill. He knew this was probably his only chance. So he hired an even tackier PR person whose name was W.S. Wojciechowicz, and his nickname was Bow Wow. I will be calling him Bow Wow for obvious reasons.
Peter Ustinov deserved that Oscar, and I sobbed over Exodus, like what Sal Mineo does as a Holocaust survivor, finding something to do with the rest of his life, and then going through a heartbreak when his fiance is brutally murdered. Chill Wills does not deserve to be in the company of those 2 performances.
Absolutely not. And Sal Mineo is an amazing actor. Peter Ustinov, amazing actor. Chill Wills, not an amazing actor.
Peter Ustinov is a magical creature.
He really is.
Yeah.
So Bow Wow kicked off the campaign by sending a mailer to all of the Academy voters, quoting Hedda Hopper, saying she hoped he would get the Oscar, which she apparently did say. But we also know that she is a monster, and she didn't care for this and announced that she rescinded that statement after that mailing went out, with her being quoted without her consent. Chill panicked, apologized, and threw Bow Wow under the bus for all of this, saying that he didn't know that his PR person was doing this. And yeah, he knew that his PR person did this. Bow Wow also took out an ad in the trades listing all of the Oscar winners that Chill had voted for over the course of his career. There was another ad that was a full page of testimonials from Texans. And then, probably a huge bummer one, an ad that was directed to all the members of the Academy that said, win, lose, or draw, you're still my cousins and I love you all.
Wait, I thought your Academy vote was supposed to be private.
There's actually no requirement to keep your vote private. You totally can share it, but good taste and professionalism should and does often keep people from sharing it. So it's your choice to do what you will with. Groucho Marx saw these ads and he responded with his own paid ad that said, Dear Mr. Wills, I am delighted to be your cousin, but I am still voting for Sal Mineo. Not unlike our gravestone earlier, Bow Wow also brought the Lord into it. He took out an ad featuring a cast photo with the message, "We of the Alamo cast are praying harder than the real Texans prayed for their lives at the Alamo for Chill Wills to win the Oscar. Cousin Chill's acting was great. Your Alamo cousins." Just let that wash over you for a second, that they're suggesting that they want him to win the Oscar more than that white supremacy death cult wanted to survive the siege.
This is terrible PR work. This ad is terrible. I'm looking at the picture of it.
Variety actually refused to run this ad, but the Hollywood Reporter didn't. And it will not surprise you to know that no one in the cast signed off on this message. This was just like a bridge too far for the industry. And the, in comparison, restrained looking Birdwell said of this advertisement, "It felt as if someone had taken a bucket of fecal matter and thrown it over a beautiful red rose." I think we can say that, having just seen this movie, that is an overstatement. Everyone's communicating to each other through trade advertising. So John Wayne took out an ad the next day and said, "I wish to state that Chill Will's ad, of which we had no advance knowledge, makes an untrue and reprehensible claim. No one in the Batjack office," and Batjack was his production company, "or Russell Birdwell has been a party to his advertising." Bow Wow went ahead and committed professional harakiri here and took out an ad apologizing for that ad that said Chill had nothing to do with it, which is absolutely not believable, as I stated up top. All of this was the final nail in the coffin in terms of it just becoming a huge joke. Like, Billy Wilder won the DGA award, and he joked in his acceptance speech, "Keep praying, cousins. We hope Oscar will say the right thing this year." And what ultimately happened is the movie won one Oscar, and that was for sound. And that is the sad, sad awards talk of the Alamo.
That's an amazing story, Sarah. Thank you. Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
Absolutely. I'd be delighted to do that. We rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specially tailored to the issues specific to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
Okay, so I will read mine off first. So outward appearances for makeup and hair, I gave it a 3. For acting and casting, I gave it a 1.5. The 1.5 being for people who might be trying, but no one could move this script. For passage of time, I gave it a 5 because it's happening over about a 2-week period. There's no mystery around it. For costuming, I gave it a 3.5. For quality of the script, I gave it a 1. For accuracy, I gave it a 1.75, which is lower than The Conqueror. We have more records for this than we did with The Conqueror. For storytelling, was it cliched? Was it interesting? Was it inventive? I gave it a 0. For production value, I gave it a 4. For production direction decision making, I gave it a 1.5. I don't know how it scored that much. And for do we care, I gave it a 0.5. So I will add all that up while you do yours.
Okay. Outward appearances, makeup, and hair, I gave it a 3. Acting and casting, I gave it a 2 for those people who were trying. Passage of time, I gave it a 2. Costuming, I gave it a 2. Quality of the script, I gave it a 2. Accuracy, I gave it a 1. Storytelling, I gave it a 1. Production value, I gave it a 7. That money was on the screen. It just was poorly deployed. Production direction decision making, I gave it a 2. Do we care? I gave it a 1. And let me add those up.
I did not follow the meaning of my words for production value there.
At 7 feels a little much. because it's also like the money was on the screen, but people make movies for a lot less that look a lot better. So I feel like I went a little over the top there.
Oddly, we're back to you being the nice one.
I don't know why. Okay, I came out to a 2.3.
So my average came to 2.075. The Alamo, your score came to 2.1875. You earned second opinion.
Bravo, Alamo.
Bravo.
So it is time for second opinion, the element we stole from How Did This Get Made?
Prize for scoring above an 8 or below a 4 is that you get to hear us make fun of IMDb reviewers who disagreed with our assessment of the film. I will attempt this first one, Sarah. Okay. 10 out of 10. Duke's Labor of Love Classic. Written by Frank 4122 on January 7th of 2018. I saw this movie when it first came out and just saw it again on DVD. It gets better with age. John Duke Wayne put everything he had into this movie with an all-star cast and incredible acting. The Alamo is a timeless classic. Richard Widmark, Frankie Avalon, Linda Crystal, Ken Curtis, Richard Boone, Patrick Wayne, and Joan O'Brien put in stellar performances. I will get the uncut version when it comes out, as this is too important of a movie. The Alamo brilliantly portrays the struggle of freedom and independence of a young nation. A must-see for all generations. Sarah, what do you think?
What do you think the uncut version is? Like, what happens in that?
I don't know. We might have seen the uncut one. I wasn't asking too many questions. I just wanted it to end.
Yeah. I agree. The acting is incredible.
It depends on which number in the definitions next to incredible in the big old omnibus dictionary you're going for there.
The acting defies credulity if that's the incredible we're going with.
You're right. I mean, what other movie can you think of where you can imagine an actor perhaps not play acting drunk, but really getting drunk because he misses Otto Preminger so much?
Maybe it would be because he misses Otto Preminger, but The Island of Dr. Moreau, the one with Marlon Brando, I can actually imagine that precise situation taking place, is that an actor on the set of that film, probably Mr. Brando, is just getting drunk because he misses Otto Preminger. That's the only one that comes to mind, though.
So could you read this next review, which is titled 10 out of 10, in all caps, the greatest movie of all time, written by Guess 5 on April 16th of 1999. So dawn of IMDb here, folks. Sarah?
I like everything about the Alamo, and I like this movie about the Alamo. I think this is the best movie of all time. Even for people who don't know very much about the Alamo, this is an interesting movie. John Wayne does an excellent job playing my hero, the great Colonel Davy Crockett. One of my favorite characters was Colonel Travis because the actor playing him looks very similar to the paintings I've seen of Travis. The first time I saw this movie, it made me cry at the end because even though the defenders blasted them down, the Mexicans still kept coming and overwhelmed the great defenders. I think that this was the movie that John Wayne was at his most heroic. Remember the Alamo, 5 exclamation points.
So there is only one known from life representation of William Travis, and it's a drawing. I did not remark on whether it looks like Lawrence Harvey. It just looks like a man with dark hair. There's a painting of him, but it was not made from life. But more importantly, was this written by a sarcastic Tisch student?
I mean, you like everything about the Alamo? Okay.
It's a very touristy plaza in San Antonio. It's kind of an eyesore. They've been trying to fix it for decades, and no one can agree on how to do it because of the conflicting narratives and interest groups involved, and this is covered quite effectively in the book Forget the Alamo. This person, what he doesn't include is that he likes the idea of people owning other people.
He likes everything about the Alamo.
Which includes that it was a fight to allow people to continue owning other people within a given space and territory.
Yeah.
Okay, so other stuff that you should watch instead. There's so many things that are not this movie that I'm so happy to talk about now.
Like anything?
If you want a Western, watch Tombstone or Blazing Saddles. I would also recommend watching any of the movies in our Black History Month series, and I would recommend Trumbo, the subject of episode 39, to learn more about why John Wayne is a worthless piece of shit. There's a great scene where Dalton Trumbo tells John Wayne off for being a chicken hawk, and I wish that every single American would watch this scene and take it to heart and be changed and shaped and swayed by it. The Lady Gaga album, Joanne, has a song called John Wayne with the lyric, "I'm strung out on John Wayne," that I had at the back of my head periodically through the process of creating this episode. I think that Joanne is underappreciated among Lady Gaga's albums, and the song transition from Angel down into Grigio Girls is perfect. And I know that everyone loves The Fame Monster, but my two favorite Lady Gaga albums are Born This Way and Joanne. Lady Gaga, yet another person that I like more than I like John Wayne. The book Forget the Alamo was extremely useful and is a fantastic read because it isn't just about what actually happened at the Alamo. It's about the mythologizing and the battle over how the Alamo is to be seen and taught. So, terrific book and very quick, very engaging read. Also, watch The Apartment, the movie that won Best Picture in 1960. Watch any of Billy Wilder's movies. I especially love the misunderstood ones that I kind of stumbled on knowing nothing about when I had a weekend afternoon wide open and I thought I'd go to the film forum. Those films include Ace in the Hole, 1, 2, 3, and Kiss Me Stupid. If you only have a few minutes, look up Edward G. Robinson's monologue about insurance from Double Indemnity and reflect on the magic that happens when a great director takes a great actor to the heights. Billy Wilder was a great director who had a brilliant sense of nuance that enabled him to bravely call out both the right and left wings, versions of fascism when he saw them blossoming. I love Billy Wilder, and you should watch anything that he made contemporary to this instead of the Alamo.
Aligned with all of your recommendations here. I would also say strong recommend for another movie about the Alamo, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which is an outstanding and delightful film. I would also say listen to the Behind the Bastards episodes on John Wayne and Jim Bowie, and also just listen to that show. It's freaking amazing. It's so good. And also I did mention Saving Private Ryan in here. That's a good movie that sets up stakes in a battle and is pretty great. Honestly, there's very few things I wouldn't recommend instead of watching this nothing of a film. And yeah, for the giggles of it, definitely look into that scene in which Bryan Cranston tells John Wayne to punch him in the face and calls him out for being a chicken hawk. So, yeah. But literally anything else but this. This movie's garbage.
As we said a few weeks ago in our The Agony and the Ecstasy episode, I hear Fargo was pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, Fargo is pretty good.
Retractions, apologies, and listener mailbag.
Before we go, we have to apologize for something we said in a previous episode that turned out to be misinformation, and we are sorry for this.
We were wrong. Sometimes we're wrong.
Rena, what were we wrong about?
Sarah, you were wrong in the way you identified the podcast Robert Bellissimo at the movies. You called him Robert Fellissimo, but he is Robert Bellissimo with a B, not Robert Fellissimo with an F. What do you have to say for yourself?
I have to say that this was just plain old crappy of me not to get his name right, especially given the breadth of insight that this episode that I watched, which was all about, and it was an interview with the editor of Star 80, Alan Heim, and it gave us a ton of insight into his editing process and how he worked with Fosse. And I really not only relied on it to kind of inform my thinking around the film and the technical details of it, but also really enjoyed the conversation and appreciated listening to it. So I'm really I'm legitimately, sincerely sorry I screwed this up, because he deserves a lot of credit for such a great interview and for a show that I have checked out additionally. So I really appreciate that he did that interview. And I'm really sorry I got your name wrong.
Also, I noted that he is a fan of one of the two Jean Harlow biopics that came out in 1965, of the one starring Carol Baker. So he is welcome to come on this show anytime to talk about that movie with us.
Indeed. I would love to hear a full-throated defense of that film.
Okay. Sarah, can you take us out?
I would be happy to. If you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @BioPicAPodcastStory. So do check us out there, and we'll link to it in the show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of the movies we've done so far. And if you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in next week when we'll be releasing a re-recorded version of our Milk episode. That was episode 6 from last year. That was the first movie in our Pride Month series. We're gradually replacing a few very early episodes that we pulled because they weren't very good, or because the sound quality was garbage, since we had not yet learned that you need to turn off the air conditioner while recording a podcast.
Yeah, the Milk episode sounds like we recorded it in a submarine.
So you'll be getting that next week. We have guest stars for the final 2 episodes of April that we'll be announcing soon. Yeah, exciting schedule up ahead.
Indeed.
So good night to the earnest and the cynical.
Good night.
Good night, Sarah.
Good night, Raina.